The playbook we've seen once before, a conservative tactic on immigration.
Vlogging pod starts like a conversation. Cup of coffee with no destination. Just voices trying to understand what's happening across this land. From your stories told to the pages turned. Every question, every word, supported by SheSharesStudios.net.
Hello, and welcome to the Vlogging Pod. In Lake Forest, Illinois in 1933, James Boone Wilson and Margaret Culligan Wilson welcomed a son during the height of the Great Depression. James Boone Wilson worked his way through college selling fraternity jewelry before later moving into advertising, while Margaret Culligan Wilson came from a Republican-leaning household. The family valued discipline, education, private school, and hard work, and their son grew up around ambition, private school, discipline, and conservative politics. Their son, Pete, attended private school in Missouri before later making his way to Yale University, where he studied English while participating in Navy ROTC. After graduating, he served as a Marine Corps infantry officer before eventually attending law school at the University of California, Berkeley. After passing the California bar exam, Pete briefly practiced criminal defense law in San Diego. Years later, when asked why he left the work behind, he explained bluntly, "I realized I couldn't be a criminal defense lawyer because most of the people who come to you are guilty." Critics of statements like that argued that the American legal system is built around the idea that defendants are presumed innocent until proven guilty in the court of law, and that a defense attorney's responsibility is to ensure constitutional rights and fair representation regardless of personal belief. Pete's political training came through some of the most influential Republican figures of the 20th century. In 1962, he worked as an advance aide for Richard Nixon's campaign for governor of California. Nixon would later become national associated with anti-crime messaging, backlash politics surrounding people's legal right to protest, and the belief that America needed stronger and stricter leadership to stop decline and disorder. Just 2 years later, Pete also worked for Barry Goldwater's 1964 presidential campaign. Goldwater opposed parts of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, especially the sections preventing racial discrimination by private businesses. Critics at the same time argued that positions like those opened the door for racial discrimination to continue under the language of local control, limited government, and personal freedom. Whether people agreed with those movements or not, Pete was learning politics directly inside them. In 1966, Pete won a seat in the California State Assembly and later became Republican whip. Pete's work in the Assembly placed him directly inside a Republican movement increasingly centered around conservative control, authority, and frustration with rapid social and conscious change happening throughout the United States. Then came San Diego. In 1971, Pete became mayor and served for more than a decade. Like-minded supporters to his ideas were fond of his position. Critics, however, often used his style of leadership as part of a growing conservative movement that prioritized, besides growth, government control, physical restraint, over expanding social programs that gave back to the community. During the same period, Pete recruited Clarence Pendleton Jr. into San Diego's Model Cities program. Pendleton would later become Ronald Reagan's chairman of the United States Commission on Civil Rights. Under Pendleton, the commission became deeply controversial after criticizing affirmative action programs, questioning parts of traditional civil rights enforcement, and arguing that government dependency itself had become a major social problem. Critics saw many of those positions as an attack on civil rights protections that had been built during the 1960s. By 1982, Pete had entered the United States Senate. During his Senate race against Jerry Brown, one of the strongest campaign themes became crime and the courts. He repeatedly attacked Brown over judicial appointments, especially California Chief Justice Rose Byrd, arguing the courts had become too lenient and disconnected from public rights and safety concerns. The themes surrounding stronger law enforcement, stricter courts, and conservative government authority were already becoming central parts of his political identity. In Washington, Pete developed a reputation as a fiscal conservative and became known as the watchdog of the Treasury. He backed efforts focused on reducing government spending and emphasizing taxpayer responsibility, especially regarding federal programs and social spending that impacted local communities. Critics argue many of those policies published social burdens downward onto states and local communities while cutting away broader federal protection and support systems that help people in those communities. By the 1980s, the boy now known as Pete from Illinois had another ambition. He wanted to become governor of California. For much of the 20th century, California was viewed as a Republican stronghold, and the state launched the careers of Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan. Republicans carried California in presidential elections throughout much of the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, including victories in 1968, 1972, 1980, 1984, and 1988. California Republicans built strong coalitions around suburban voters, business interests, anti-tax movements, law and order politics, and conservative frustrations with rapid social change. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, California was under enormous pressure. Recession, immigration debates, rising house costs, racial tension, crime, fears, and anxiety over government spending was colliding all at once. Then came the boy with ambition, Pete. Pete Wilson began his race for governor inside the California climate. He won the governorship in 1990 during one of the state's most difficult economic periods in decades. Budget problems grew, unemployment rose, and public frustration spread across the state. As those pressures mounted, immigration increasingly became one of the most political explosive issues in California. Then came Proposition 187. The measure proposed blocking undocumented immigrants from many public services, including non-emergency health care, social services, public education. It also pushed teachers, nurses, and public employees into reporting and verification rules tied to immigration status. Supporters argued California taxpayers were carrying an unsustainable financial burden. Opponents argued the measure targeted immigrant families, children, and entire communities while turning public institutions into immigration enforcement systems. At the time, Proposition 187 was extremely popular with many California voters. In 1994, the measure passed with nearly 59% of the vote, and Pete Wilson won election to a second term as governor. In the short term, the strategy worked politically, but the long-term results became something very, very different. Civil rights groups challenged the law in court. Major parts of Proposition 187 were eventually blocked and later ruled unconstitutional because immigrant enforcement largely falls under federal authority rather than state authority. At the same time, immigrant communities, Latino voters, student organizers, civil rights groups began mobilizing politically on a massive scale. Communities that felt targeted by measure increasingly registered to vote, organized locally, and became deeply involved in California politics. What was intended to strengthen Republican power in California instead helped reshape the political future of the state. California has not voted Republican for president since 1988. By 2026, that means nearly 4 decades have passed since California last supported a Republican president candidate. Republicans have also struggled for years in statewide races while Democrats dominated much of the California's modern political landscape. For many historians and political analysts, Proposition 187 became more than a ballot measure. It became a turning point, a moment when fear, frustration, immigration, politics, taxpayer anger, and law and order messaging may have won a short-term political victory, but also helped drive long-term political backlash that permanently altered the direction of California itself. Today's sources come from California Governor's Library Pete Wilson biography, Nixon Foundation Pete Wilson profile, Reagan Foundation Pete Wilson biography, Stanford Martin Luther Jr. Research Institution Barry Goldwater profile, Encyclopedia.com Clarence Pendleton Jr. background, The Washington Post Clarence Pendleton and Civil Rights Commission controversy, ACLU Southern California Proposition 187 court rulings, 270 to win California presidential voting history. Thank you for listening. Until next time, bye-bye for now.